Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. My name is Rabbi Ben Goldstein. I'm the rabbi at Congregation B'nai Israel in Tustin, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, Joe Mendelsohn and Marcia Tilchin. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Joe Mendelsohn. I'm with Laguna Woods.
And I am Marcia Tilchin. I'm the founder and spiritual leader of the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County. And delighted to be back here again with Joe and Ben, who I'm meeting for the first time. And it's wonderful to be able to talk Torah with you. So I had a question. We are in the Parashat of the week is Vayigash. And we are still, we're sort of at the denouement of the Joseph story. And Rabbi Nico last week gave a very, very thorough sort of history of how we got from Joseph being a little kid and a favorite of his father and getting the coat to being resented by his brothers, thrown into a pit, taken down to an Egypt, elevating to the status that he has. And now, when Miketz ended last week, it was a total cliffhanger. It's the brothers standing with Joseph with the goblet in Benjamin's bag, and what are we going to do? And so then this parasha opens with this gorgeous soliloquy by Judah. And in the soliloquy, he says to his Joseph, if you take Benjamin as prisoner, because Joseph says, you guys can all go home, I just want this one, obviously knowing what he was doing. So if he says, if you take Benjamin, our dad is gonna die. And that's when Joseph loses his stuff. By the way, there's some funny things where it says, he sends everybody away so that he can reveal himself to his brothers privately, except that his sobs were so loud that everybody in Egypt heard them, including Pharaoh, which is kind of like a funny visual. But anyway, I guess I want to know, do you think it was the mention of his father? What brought him to this moment? Why was it that speech? How else could it have unfolded?
Joe, do you want to take this?
I look at that story and all I think about is how Judah has grown to be such a mensch and plead for his brother. I still wonder why Joseph is challenging this family so much. Does he resent his brothers? Has he really grown, or is he just a tool to move this whole story along? I'm not really sure that he was going to reveal himself to his brothers.
Yeah. I don't know that he was going to either. I've learned this story ever since I was a kid, and it's always been presented as Joseph either manipulating or testing the brothers and things like that. And it makes me think of family dynamics, right? Joseph is now incredibly important in Pharaoh's Egypt, but he's also, doesn't matter how old he is, he's still the younger brother of these people who threw him in a pit and probably wasn't great before that. So I love the realism of it, right? It doesn't matter how much this young man has accomplished, or maybe he's not even that young anymore. It doesn't matter how much he's accomplished. It really is, he's really still just that little boy who wants the approval of his big brothers. And I think that kind of insight is so amazing, right? Yes, we know he's powerful, and these brothers see him as powerful, but he never sees himself that way in this story. He still sees himself as the little Shmendrik who's trying to chase after his brothers.
Although, Ben, it's interesting because he says in chapter 45, verse 8, he says, in English, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me father to Pharaoh. He uses that word. Now we understand that he knows he's not Pharaoh's father, but there is a sense that outside of his family context, he's like the Av, whatever that means. But when you're in your family, but I think your point as well, when he's with his family, he's like always that little, we kind of revert.
Yeah, I mean, I think, hey guys, don't worry about it. It was God. By the way, I've become pretty important myself. It's still the younger brother trying to prove himself to his big brothers. That's how I see it.
I see. Okay.
And I also see that he may even recognize himself as being that tool to move the story along, because he's fulfilling a prophecy here. God has promised, I'm going to bring these people to a place where they're going to end up as slaves. And this is really his job. I don't think he wants to tell anybody that. If he can really, truly, read dreams and so on, he may know what the outcome is going to be. But at this point, he's still functioning as the tool. And we really don't see a lot of Joseph. I mean, he becomes the person that the next Pharaoh didn't even know existed. He kind of leaves the story, and we have Menashe and Ephraim continuing on, but Joseph pretty much stops by the end of this book.
That's somebody asked the question the other day, why Joseph is not recognized as one of the patriarchs. I mean, just because his character is so rich and textured. And one of the rabbinic answers is that God actually never speaks to him directly, speaks to him through his dreams, which is interesting. And also, there may be a lot of other reasons, for that, because he's sort of part of. We move from the familial to the tribal, and we need him to be. And in fact, in some ways, he gets a double portion with Menashe and Ephraim, assuming the place of him and Levi, right, ultimately. So he does get some kind of reward. But I thought that was an interesting question. Last week, we sort of foreshadowed this parsha when Nico gave his understanding of when Joseph says, "I am Joseph, is my father still alive?" And his understanding, and I guess I want to know what the two of you think about this, is that he was saying, "Hey, look, it's me, the mask is off, I'm Joseph," but really that he was reaffirming for himself, "Oh my God, I'm not Zephnath Paneah or whatever name I got, but I'm actually an Israelite kid named Joseph, and I'm connected to my parentage." I'd love to know, sort of, would that understanding resonate for you in any way?
I think it sounds a lot like what Ben was talking about, that
Yeah.
he's still trying to prove himself in who he is.
I mean, I also wonder how much of it is he can't actually believe that his father is still alive, right? When Joseph was there, he was the favored son. He was, the moon and all those things around which everybody else revolved. And did life go on without him, right?
Wow.
How could my father have dealt with this, with my absence? He's still alive? I thought it would have killed him. Like, I don't know. I mean, that's just something that crossed my mind when you were asking that.
That's a great read, and you can imagine him, because there is a quality of almost inconspicuous self-importance about throughout his life, which is
Inconspicuous. I don't know if it's pretty conspicuous.
no, it's conspicuous, but not to himself, is what I'm saying.
Right. Right.
Yes, absolutely.
There's also this deceitful attitude, I think, continues. I still don't feel he's being honest with his brothers all the way through the story. And that, at the end of this parsha, we have it again, because while the commentators will support what Joseph says to his brothers, you're shepherds, and tell them that you handle livestock. And I'm going to tell the Pharaoh that you are shepherds and that you tend livestock. And the Egyptians abhor shepherds. And yet, when you read how Pharaoh greets the chosen brothers and Jacob when he comes before Pharaoh, he's doing nothing but praising the family and says, "Here, take the best land, and take, if you have capable guys, they take care of my livestock also." So I'm wondering, is Joseph really telling the truth to his brothers? Is it Pharaoh just not one of the people who happened to have this bigotry The commentators support what Joseph's saying, but the Pshat, the simple reading, just doesn't follow it for me.
Well, and on a global level, I think what this story paints is that, when you have a personal relationship with somebody who's different from you, and where there may be, again, stereotypes, or an understanding of who they are and why you shouldn't engage with them. Once you're connected, people save people if they have friends, in who are suffering. So where there can be, black on white, or, Jew against non-Jew or whatever. But when you have a friendship or relationship, and Pharaoh felt so close to Joseph that all of Joseph's family to him would have been wonderful. And that might have absolutely cast aspersions on what he always thought was the truth. And by the way, I was just thinking, like, Pharaoh really is Joseph's great dad. I mean, he just loves him. I mean, I know that Joseph says, I'm father to Pharaoh, but Pharaoh takes care of this guy in a very significant way. It's interesting that Joseph says, I'm father to Pharaoh, when in fact it's this man that took him under his wing. But I don't know, Ben, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I wonder if it's like the same kind of thing as, let's have a Jewish doctor or a Jewish accountant. If it's actually not some internalized, we'll give you the best stuff because you guys know how to do this, right? You're really good with money. Like, I don't know if it's coming off as kind of a paternal love or internalized stereotypes. You could read it either way. I like your reading. I also think the other reading is a valid one as well. I don't know.
Interesting.
And doesn't Pharaoh say that somebody as wise as this man earlier on, when he interprets the dreams, he does give kavod to Joseph at that point for his talent. Your statement of wow, they know how to do these things. Yeah, he's given Joseph that understanding. His understanding of Joseph, I agree.
Right. Some of Pharaoh's best friends are Jewish.
Right. I just don't see Joseph as maturing and becoming a mensch as our tradition says. Well, I feel, he stops. He really stops his growth. And of course, Judah is the one who really shows himself as the hero of the story.
So how is he stunted in your mind?
He has the talent, but he doesn't use it as a gift where he's helping others. He's helping Pharaoh. He's doing what he's supposed to do. He's, even in the handling of the famine, the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine, what is he doing? He's amassing a wealth for Pharaoh. He's taking
and taking away everybody's land, and not creating a way for them to get it back after the famine is over. He basically becomes like, you could see him. I mean, I wouldn't call him a slumlord because that's not what he is, but like where he ends up, because they amass all this property and everybody goes into servitude. Ding, 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 which is how everybody's, ultimately in servitude. Now, something eventually happens. By the way, I don't know that it's the immediate next Pharaoh that doesn't know Joseph, but I imagine it's a couple Pharaohs later that sort of forgets. And something does happen, at that point. Is the entire Egyptian population still in servitude to Pharaoh based upon the actions of Joseph many centuries earlier? Has there been some equilibrium reachieved in Egypt? These are all questions that, never really get asked. And then ultimately we understand why the Israelites live in a separate area so they can practice whatever they practice in Goshen and their shepherds and whatever. But are they the only slaves, or is still everybody? I mean, that's just an interesting question. When do the Egyptians get their land back?
And since the Israelites are living in Goshen, they're far enough away. Are they actually under the servitude, or are they living alone and being living their own kind of life without that servitude.
Right.
I think they still have their own land, don't they?
They do.
And that's a really important thing, in that they actually own their own land. They are self-sufficient. And that's when we get into the next book and we read about how this new Pharaoh either doesn't know Joseph or doesn't want to know Joseph.
Right.
Yeah, which is probably closer to the truth. You know, he sees this group of Israelites as a threat.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, to me, this is I'm not up to the, what the property rights of Egyptians and Israelites were. I'm not, so learned in that. But to me, before we get to the next book and about the servitude and the Exodus, this is it's the beginning of the end of this family dynamics, right? We've been dealing with family dynamics this entire book of Breshit. And one of the things that I love about it is how easy it is to read ourselves into the text, right? When I think about Esav and Jacob, Esav and Yaakov, or Yosef and his brothers, the family dynamics of whether we grow or we're stunted or we're, Joseph's still this, little boy to his brothers. It's so easy to relate to. And I can't believe how poorly our ancestors come off, right? Yeah, there's growth and Judah has some, he matures, as you mentioned, but there's so much dysfunction in the family that it's actually, I don't know if the word is liberating or, it leaves me with optimism that no matter what family we come from, right, we're not expected to be perfect and have these perfect relationships with our family. We're not going to hopefully we're not going to sell our siblings into slavery, but there's always room for growth, and we can learn from the good things our ancestors did, but also the flaws and the faults that they had, right? We can learn about not favoring children from the story of Yaakov and his and Joseph's Technicolor dream coat, and actually Joseph himself kind of fixes it, right? Yaakov shows him all the favoritism in the world, and how does Joseph treat his own children, right? He switches and he makes sure that they're both equal, and they both get the blessing from his father, and I think that is something to take away from this parsha and this whole arc of these characters and these stories in Breshit.
It's interesting. I've often asked myself this question. We skip a lot of time from the end of Vayechi to the beginning of Shemot, and the whole whatever the structure was, it has completely changed. The Israelite nation has completely changed. They've expanded radically, and we really do move away from the family drama. And I think we never really understand how, like, the tribe of Levi goes from being, one of the brothers that slaughtered a bunch of innocent men in Shechem to being the priestly sect. And we understand that there is, you can do some machinations in that way. But by the time we meet them in, there was a man, a respectable man from the house of Levi, Amram, and he ended up having these children. And there's no longer, it's like Levi has moved many centuries away from the stigma that he would have had at the end of Genesis as part of all of the dysfunction in this family and the ways the brothers interacted. And I guess that's probably deeply intentional, that the stories are certainly connected, but it's like we were able to rewrite a lot throughout those many hundreds of years between Joseph's death and the birth of Moses. I'd love to know.
Yeah, I think that this is really the final statement, is that it says this is the Torah, this is the book that is creating a religion. We have to move away from being a clan and being a people. And what you've just described is that transition. You've both been describing how we're moving from family. And it's funny because we consider ourselves a giant family of Jews in some respect. We are a peoplehood, we're a culture as well as religion. But at the same time, to be able to create that, we have to move away from just being the clan and start to transition.
Oh, you're waiting for me to say. I mean,
No,
no. I mean, to me, I don't know the historicity of all of this, but to me, the authorship, we've come to teach this story in Breshit, and now we're teaching a different story, right? And Joe, as you mentioned, we're no longer a clan, we're no longer a tribe, we're many tribes and a nation, right? And so the tribe of Levi, who, whatever their origin, and there's probably things that we don't understand and will never understand because we weren't around during the writing of all of this. And maybe there are kind of biblical pop culture references or idioms or allusions to things that we don't understand that would fill in the questions that Marcia's asking. And we start a new chapter excuse me, we start a new chapter and a new kind of narrative in Exodus, and it no longer is about a family, it's about a nation, the journey of going from slavery to freedom. And it's a very, if the first book of the Torah, if Breshit is about family dynamics, the second book is about a kind of national struggle, a national struggle to fulfill our destiny of going to the promised land.
And also how we're going to relate to this God that we can't see, hear, sense in any way.
Right. Yeah.
And that no one has really, it seems like not a lot of people have met. Like, I mean, you know what I'm saying? There, God seems, when God hears the cries of the Israelites, later on, like, they don't know it. They don't know that God. It's so interesting, almost that the patriarchs sort of kept that to themselves. And I mean, I'm sure, but that's so interesting. One of the other, one of the things that I was thinking about is, Ben, you were talking a little bit about different authorships, and I don't know that everybody watching our, Sipur Ray sheet is even sort of tuned in to that notion. Would you just sort of share a little bit about that?
Well, actually, it's funny because I didn't mention different authorships. I just said the author, right? I was not even addressing who the author was or who they were. That is a whole different conversation. And to me, when it comes to all this, I don't know if you remember this years ago, but Rabbi David Wolpe gave a sermon on Pesach. Do you know about this? Right, about whether or not the Exodus ever happened.
Right.
And rather than rehash all of that, the upshot of it is, it doesn't really matter, right?
Whether it's or not.
The historicity of the Torah isn't important. The narrative is the important, right? We tell the Seder and we tell these stories of our patriarchs, and whether or not Yosef was a man who lived X amount of years or is a literary figure from whom we can learn so many different things, right? It almost doesn't matter because we can learn those stories, right?
And we can expand that to the entire Torah and everything.
Yes. Yeah, and by the way,
if we had purpose.
Right, and if we had different colleagues here, some of them would have a different take on all of this, and that's part of the beauty of the, use a cheesy phrase, the tapestry of Judaism, right? Where all these different we feel all this, but that's part of this, right? The question all of the questions we've been asking about, would he have revealed himself, and all, about Yosef and about Pharaoh and the farmers and all those different things. The beauty of this tradition is that we get, it's noten Torah, right? Every time we read the Torah, we say it in present tense, that God is still giving the Torah. And through these kinds of conversations and these questions, some of which don't have answers, we fulfill the commandment of still giving the Torah and not having to come up with all the answers, but to ask the questions and encourage conversations like these.
I totally agree. And actually in Devar Torah, written by Rabbi Michael Gold, who's in Florida, he was just reiterating, and I think this affirms what you're saying, that the Torah is never the same Torah twice, because we as the reader always evolve, and we are never the same reader twice. So that's why, so we can all look at the character of Joseph, and some can see him as like as I would say, he had all this gift, but he couldn't see how, you know, basically amassing all this wealth for Pharaoh was going to, in the long term, destroy, you know, nations and peoples, and they'd all be poor. That's one way to look at him. Another way is to say, oh my God, this guy was so pure and he really grew into himself and he did forgive his brothers. He's the model of forgiveness. There's so many different things you could say. And however we want to see him is how we need to see him in any given year at any time.
Yeah.
So I guess I would say this, because as we're getting, you know, next week will be the last parasha in Genesis, Vayigash, and the blessings. I don't want to do spoiler alert, but the blessings are kind of complicated that Jacob gives his sons. And one of the things you do know, what we learn next week, is that Jacob has no rose-colored glasses. He sees his children for who they are. But I would love to pose this as we're sort of winding down our discussion, but for, you know, if there are some key, well, I think, Ben, you really shared yours, some key takeaways from the book of Genesis, from Bereshit. Well, one of them is that nobody's family is perfect, which is true. And I have found great comfort in that myself over the years. But what are some other, you know, sort of broad takeaways as we get close to the end of the play, so to speak?
I think Ben gave the other one that I always love, and that is, no matter what our family background is, whatever our capabilities, with all of our faults, we still are capable of doing great things.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I think the other one, another one is, I look at somebody like Avraham, right, who's the patriarch of patriarchs, and how accomplished he was, and I contrast that with how he treated his own family, right? There's the story of the three messengers, angels, men who come to visit, and he treats them with unbelievable deference, and then yells at his family to go get them food, and right, and he and his wife, and all of the drama that comes with him in his personal life, and Yaakov is the same way, Jacob is the same way. These are incredibly accomplished men who have a lot to learn when it comes to being a spouse or a parent. And I think I'm not going to have 12 children, but I have children, and I know that I'm an imperfect father, and that's okay. There's an acceptance of that, and there's an ability to be better tomorrow than we are today, right? There's a quote by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who says, if you're not going to be better tomorrow than you are today, then why have a tomorrow, right? And I think the stories in Bereshit of these incredibly flawed people, Judah being one of them, Yehuda, right, who helps sell his brother and then redeems himself with treatment of his other brother, we can take a lot from those arcs of these different characters. And I think those are really great lessons to learn.
I think we've probably gone over, so let's stop with that. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
Big conversation.
Thanks.
And Shabbat.
And we just want to, I don't know if you can, but we just want to say thank you for joining us today for Sifur Reshit, for our discussion on Vayigash. And we wish you a Shabbat Shalom and look forward to seeing you next week.
Shabbat Shalom. Good Shabbos.